Lungiswa's exhibition Sleeping Witness opened at the Henry Moore Institute in July and sadly closes and leaves us this Sunday. So if you haven't yet had a chance to see it, please get down to visit it soon. It includes 2 new installations, Zinadaka and Untupamanzi, along with the 2019 film Gathering. We are delighted to have been able to publish the 80th edition of the Institute's long-standing Essays on Sculpture series to coincide with this exhibition. If you're interested in getting a copy of this, which includes fantastic photography of all the new works and a brilliant essay by Nombuso Metibella, it's available from the reception at the Institute, or if you'd like to get a copy online, I think one of my colleagues has kindly already got there and put a link to it in the chat. Melanie Keen, who we're delighted to welcome, is Director of the Wellcome Collection, London, incredible organisation which aims to challenge the way we think about and feel about health. She's committed to reshaping cultural assumptions around race, disability and gender, and the human relationship to planetary health. She has an infinite array of strings to her bow, including, prior to joining the Wellcome Collection, being the Director and Chief Curator of the pioneering arts organisation Iniva, the Institute of International Visual Arts in London. We're absolutely thrilled to start to bring this exhibition to a close, but to re-energise it with a great conversation this evening and to welcome Lungiswa and Melanie. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. Melanie, Lungiswa, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, for that great introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be in conversation with Lungiswa. I feel sad that we've only just met once, Lungiswa and I won't actually see the exhibition, but I've had the pleasure of enjoying the exhibition through the fantastic photography and reading the essay which Lawrence mentioned. So we're going to take a journey, I think, through Lungiswa's work and her ideas contained in the work. So there's 2 new works here from this year, 2022, and a moving image work from 2019. So we're going to predominantly focus on the work in this exhibition, but obviously the ideas in Lungiswa's work proliferates in different spaces, in different forms as well. So Lungiswa, I wanted to start with where we started actually when we had our conversation last week. I'm sort of mindful that maybe not everyone on this call has seen your exhibition, but there's this incredible photograph, large scale black and white photograph, which is sort of steeped in sort of family memory and archive. And for me, that feels like a really fantastic starting point through which to navigate the exhibition and your ideas. Obviously, it's a great starting point for me, and I wonder if you would like to say more about this photograph as the starting point for the encounter with your work.
The photograph on the building is, I guess, part of my family archive, and it's of my mother's at New Brighton Beach. And I think, according to them, I mean, getting like specifics from my mother's is like from the early 20s is, yeah, kind of nearly impossible. So all I got when I was asking about like when the photo was taken was sometime in the 70s, they said. And they kind of are in like ranging from early to late 20s, all of them in there. And I guess, yeah, having always kind of looked to the photos of them, like I guess since starting my postgrad, somehow I was always just like fascinated at looking photos. And because I mean, my family doesn't really share that much information on their past lives at all. And so every time I see a photograph and I get to ask about it, it just feels like a new portal they open up into their own family histories. And so that's kind of been my way of looking at or discovering family histories. And so this one I came really after the work. I wasn't intending on using a photograph of them, but I felt that them being on the beach, looking fly as hell, and having fun, it was something that really was kind of important, and it communicated, versus like the time that they were in, and the energy and the way they chose to live and present themselves was kind of like counter, um, to the time that they were in, with all the protests and killings. It was really a difficult time, but that insisting on like joy, and that insisting on like collective like care amongst them, for me was like a huge sign of just, I guess, refusal and defiance that I really loved. And so and much of the work is kind of the show reflects on ancestry, and one of my mothers in the photo is no longer here on this earth. But yeah, so it felt like a fitting entryway, and it felt like something that I could give to them. But it was also, once I guess I decided on the photo, it was also important to have it in front of the building, because I wanted to have every Black person that walked past there to know that there is something of theirs in there, that there is something that they will know and will make them feel welcomed, or like it's their space, inside of that building. So it really was just trying to be like as loud as I can, like, come through to all the Black people in need. And I thought that was really important, because it's like a very colonial space for me to be there. So I thought it was important to, or my way, or an attempt of opening myself up and the work up, and wanting the space to be filled with Blackness.
And obviously I've not seen it in the flesh, but I've seen the installation shots, and this is a larger than life photograph, and it really, and the kind of position of it feels like there are these quite powerful figures looking over us and welcoming us. And actually that question of an invitation, I want to pick up on that later, because it's something which gets spoken about in one of your words, this idea about an invitation. But before we kind of get to that point, I'm really keen to sort of talk about some of the tensions that you've spoken about, which are clear in that photograph, I think, and really brought to life through your description of what that photograph means to you. And I think it's almost a signal of what you might expect when you see the work. So there's something about your installation, your use of materials, the barbed wire, the colour, the fragments of fabric and metal in the shape of coins, which is something which is exquisite, but also something which is dangerous or contaminated. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the use of your materials to convey some of those tensions, which are conveyed somewhat in the photograph, and actually are, I guess, are sort of signalling some of the tensions around apartheid, sort of kind of the need to kind of for humanity, but also the sort of the horrible incursions placed on with humans' ability to kind of to go to multiple spaces. So yeah, I want to kind of hear more about the tensions with materiality and with the ideas in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the tension, I guess, is kind of like an everyday thing. It just came naturally, because sometimes things are tense. All the time. Sometimes things are tense. We're going to places thinking we're actually going to have a good time, and it becomes tense when sometimes we act a certain way in environments that people don't expect us to be so free in, or to be so, to be fully in, as if we belong there. So sometimes people get like really confused, but the tension of space, I mean, for me, it was kind of having to move between two homes. And by two homes, I mean like back home in PE, you know, I live in like New Brighton, and it's like location slash townships slash whatever you want to call it, but it's like it's a Black area. And you know, confined spaces, back to back houses, you share all like three sides of your, you know, whatever wall space you have with um other families. And it's like compact housing, very small spaces, and like stamp like matchbox like, you know. So coming from there and then going to Cape Town and like living in a suburb like Rondebosch, where it's just like white people flourishing in their big houses with their big, you know, lawns, and they, you know, it's like, it was definitely having to move between those two spaces was like highlighted, I guess, a lot of like subtle, you know, structural violences for me. And I guess that's where, you know, the materials of the work come in, but also like the things that I choose to make within these installations, like lawns and things like that, they come up because of having to really see how in the most everyday spaces, how loudly things change. And so making me think about, I guess, you know, people's spaces of luxury and pleasure and leisure versus a lack thereof all of those things, and just the lack of space in general, I guess, where we come from, or how those spaces are treated and maintained. Um, and so between having to see in real life, like the changes in the physical spaces, and having to be in a space where I feel, you know, free and comfortable, and then having to walk around and like not really see many of my people where I'm living. And, you know, there is like the body kind of restricts itself a little bit. You're a lot more cautious and very much aware of, you know, your surroundings. When you walk around, you're also looked at, you know, by the people in these houses as to like, are you passing through? Do you live here? Who are you? And so I guess all of those kind of, you know, feels like very tense, very um, like a huge pull within me of like having to like dive between two places. And I felt the tension and the choice of materials that is kind of always seemingly harsh and quite violent, but, you know, made to be so attractive and so beautiful. I guess for me felt like the best way I can communicate both experiences, I guess, um, and the conflicting feelings, you know, of having to move into those spaces. Like you want to engage, but you can't. You have to be cautious. It's beautiful, but it's actually also violent. And so it felt like um, the materials and the tenseness that you speak of is an important, I guess, way to kind of communicate what the body goes through, and also what the air in those spaces is like. Yeah.
Yeah, you do really get a sense, even in the photography actually of the work, this real sense of lightness, as in not heavy, and gentle as in not cruel. It's extraordinary what you've managed to do in using that material and use of colour as well. And I wanted to sort of quote from I think it's from one of the texts in that sort of used to accompanying the exhibition for and Tabamanzi. So the invitation here is to think about our individual and collective presence in this space as a moment of reinvention. And I wanted to talk about this sense of generosity that's in your work, this invitation that you spoke about, which hasn't been afforded to Black people in South Africa, who were excluded from this relationship with the water and the sea and the land surrounding the sea, the beach. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more, I guess, about how this idea of generosity is sort of manifests in other areas of your work, if indeed you think it's a theme which emerges in the thing that you are, you're, I guess, playing with, interrogating.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about generosity, which it's a very nice word. It's so kind. It's very soft. I guess most of the work, I suppose, has come from such a place of frustration and a place that rather seeks to perform some sort of exclusionary action, but in the same breath giving only to a certain people. So I guess that could be where the generosity is, in that in realizing the spaces that which the work exists in, and I guess the materials that I use, and also through language and through certain things. I think that is where I kind of allow a very particular audience into the work. And it's like, this is for Black people. They will know. And I refuse to provide any kind of translation or anything like that. And so my way of going about it is trying, I guess, to do the same thing as like that tension, is to give generosity to Black people, but also give the same exclusionary energy to, whiteness within the space. And so, yeah, some installations are purely, I guess, for rest. And, with everything that I make is coming from a place of this Black woman and the many Black women that surround me and that I make around. And so when I make a place of rest, it's for us. Because, sometimes it's not about, like, I guess, the work that I put up, but it's just like, can we just have the moment of rest? Can we just rest without having to continue just working and thinking and doing all of these things? I was like, in the midst of all of this, I just want to provide a place of where we can just sit, enjoy music, smell smells that are similar to home, feel home when you're far. And I think those moments are also important, because we don't have enough of them all the time. We're meant to kind of be on and be supportive, be clever in our making, be all of these things when we're doing shows. And sometimes it just does not have to feel that way. That's not sometimes what I want to communicate. Sometimes what I want to do is to create a place of rest, of love, of rejuvenation, so that we can kind of continue to do the refusal. So I guess that I would, if I had to reflect on generosity within my work, I would say that is where it occurs. And I guess those are the reasons. But I guess, yeah, it occurs also in places or in installations that I wouldn't have thought it happens in. Even the ones that are most aggressive still manage to give something, the thing of having to say, this is kind of also like a collective experience. So in that, there's like a generosity, there's an openness for other people to kind of participate. I don't know if I answered that correctly.
I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. This is about what's coming. What's coming.
Yeah.
The intention for you in making the work, obviously, what the viewer experiences is distinct, and there might be some kind of relationship between what the viewer experiences and what you intended. But I think it's important to hear your thoughts and feelings. And I wanted to. There's some really interesting questions that are coming through, but I'm going to keep you to myself for a moment to explore some other themes, but we will definitely get to those questions. Thank you everyone who's asked a question already. So the title of the work and titles of your other works, where you speak about, there's this idea of sleeping and dreaming, and obviously sleep is in relation to rest, and this idea of being able to dream might also relate to this idea about deep sleep, about REM sleep, you know, which is truly sort of a restful sort of sleep. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the kind of the space of sleeping and dreaming, and how that might be a space of the imaginary as much as the space of the real.
So the dreaming is kind of like an exciting place of learning for me. Really, it's like another world in which I exist on, and another place to learn. I see the place of like the dreamscape as a place that is able to actually also produce some sort of knowledge, and for knowledge to be shared within that space. And most of the time it's kind of like a very personal and spiritual practice, but I realize that I have like I guess a fond association to dreaming as also like that space of collective sharing, because when I was young, I remember in the morning when we wake up, we was living with two of my moms, three of them. It was like a small house, and there was like a ton of people, a ton of people and their children. So we'd wake up in the morning, and we're eating food, which is like sometimes in this particular memory, like last night's dinner cooked up for like breakfast, umbego, and that's what we call it. So it was just during this time where we'd sit around and kind of gather, as children, we like cling to our mothers, and our mothers are there to kind of like, we all just sit together. And this is the kind of spaces that I grew up like learning about dreams. I guess what they mean in our society, and in our culture as Abantu Bakhosa, and what it means, or what it could mean, or the various things, and how to unlock them, how to like decipher them. So it was always like just this opening space where I got to hear all these kinds of stories and things, and also kind of find out like also where the people in my family are at. And so I kind of grew up just sharing dreams all the time. And, even when I, moved to Cape Town, my mom would call me, or I would call my mom and my mom would be like, yo, this is what I dreamt. And then I would share dreams with her too. And it just like became just another kind of like language and way of sharing and being together. And which soon was then even more developed into a spiritual practice of Wukirha, which is I guess the entry point sometimes is through dreams, and it's a particular spiritual practice in Makhosin. So, but I don't want to get into that very deeply, but I'm just saying like the dreams have kind of found or leaked their way into the work that I have done recently. I guess not by choice, but I'm always working from a place of where I am. And so, when I'm going and I'm within the spiritual place, then the space of dreaming becomes an important space of figuring some things out for myself, and imagining different worlds, meeting with the ancestral realm. And so all of these things are, I guess, so important. And it's like one space that I guess, in terms of landscape wise, I'm thinking now is just like there's this freedom of movement. Like there's no restrictions there. We're doing a lot of shit like kind of everywhere that we want to do. And it's quite liberating. And so to wake up in this world and have to kind of reconfigure um, everything is kind of like, again, moving between the two spaces. Um, and so, yeah, I've had a practice of where I just kind of record my dreams, but um, I found it like a way to, I guess, imagine alternate lives, different ways of being, different ways of knowing and sharing what we know. I know I have learned a lot and I have worked a lot in my dreams. And so, as much as like sometimes that place is like of deep rest, sometimes it really is not. Sometimes you are put to work in that space and then you wake up in this realm tired as hell, but having lived, you know? Um, and so, yeah, I guess the importance, I guess, from of dreams in my work is um, makes sense for me because I'm always coming from my reference points are always like oral histories and lived experiences. And so it felt quite natural for dreams to be a part of this as I'm learning more about them and I'm learning more about this journey that I am on. Um, it just feels like, oh, okay, you know, there's something else other than like Western Eastern knowledge that you know that has something worth knowing and worth exploring. And so for me, the dreams have allowed that place to be a collective space of like, in other ways we can share amongst friends and family. um yeah.
So I wanted to move away a little bit um, to sort of pull away and think about practice. But before I do that, actually, there is one question that's come up in the chat, and it does relate specifically to some of the themes that we've been exploring. And I think we could probably take these two. It's by the same guest this evening, and I think we could probably take them together. So one says, Lungiswa, you have spoken so eloquently about rest. Can you say something about the opposite quality of your work, which is danger? So that's one thing about sort of danger in your work, and we spoke a bit about that tension. And then in a previous online discussion around your work, participants were evocative and eye-opening about the significance of water, specifically the sea for the Black South African experience and its culture. Can you say more about this subject for you and your work? So there's one thing about the quality of danger that's contained within your work, but also this more sort of question of sort of geographies and territories, and what you've just evoked, which is this question about freedom of movement that's sort of limited in reality. So yeah, so one about the kind of experience of sea and one about danger.
The danger. I've never, it's that the word is like funny. I mean, I guess it's in line with violence, but I never used it or thought of it, the word in particular. Yeah, I guess I lean into danger, to that element of violence that a lot in the work, but it has to do. It's more of like a material kind of, you know, it's very closely tied to the materials that I use and I guess how I use them. And you know, for me, it's definitely also a relationship of familiarizing myself with things that I guess that I fear a lot and that I have a certain you know, fearful relationship with, or a tense one. And I guess trying to see that if I have a closer, or if I move forward to these elements that are somewhat dangerous, that if I get to have some sort of conversation and I get to work with them long enough, if that fear and that danger, changes to something else, and if it gets to be something else, or if it goes away. And most of the times, in terms of the materials and like razor wire is a very vicious material to work with. And, in the beginning, working with it with gloves, still with gloves, but I have less caution with it. And so I guess I like using the element of danger and violence for exclusionary purposes, for purposes of, for people to be aware of their bodies, and, to think of their bodies very carefully in the spaces where my work exists, and to say that sometimes that thing, that realization when you walk into a space that you cannot move without any kind of intent and awareness, is how we feel most of the time in these very very privileged, very white spaces, these spaces that kind of seem like they're welcoming to everybody, but once you're in them, you discover that it's not the case. And so I use that, I guess, to like challenge people's ideas of accessibility a lot, because you recognize this object in a certain way to be a dangerous thing, so you are immediately going to be mindful. But for me, having worked with it so much, I feel like I see it not really as dangerous. I see it as something that is very beautiful. I see it as like another language to be able to, I guess, express certain feelings. And I love that. I love that I have a language that, without any like long-term work, like one will still have that that caution with. And it just feels like I can wield some sort of fire thing in my hand to like repel, or to keep people warm at any time. So it feels like a language that I have somewhat grown to love. And I like the fact that not everybody sees it in that way. And in terms of the sea, and the importance of water in my work, I mean, I was like, is water important in my work? I think I guess it's also new. It's only come up in like the Rust works and this latest show. But my relationship to the ocean or to the sea has always been also like a landscape that is to be feared. Without, like, most of us in my family cannot swim. And, so that place, that world, that ocean world becomes one that is like there, that you have to stay in like eye distance between your family, and there's this whole fear around people drowning, and there's also these fears around like spirits taking certain people. There's a lot of I guess fear. At the same time, an extreme amount of joy within the shallow end is like, it's wild, because it's like, oh, it's this dangerous thing, but like, get us into that shallow end and we will show you living life to its fullest. Like, we are happy within this space, but we know, I guess we have developed like some sort of understanding about like how deep or how far in or how free we can be within that space. And for me, I also kind of grew up with that. And, and as I got older, I've always wanted to like feel or loved being in water, but I have this like panic, like I have like anxiety attacks when I'm in the body of water. And so again, it comes to this thing of like, okay, this is another thing that I feel like that is fearful, but I can kind of move across. And so I've been kind of taking swimming lessons on and off, and those have been wild. And it's like, yeah, people who know how to swim, heads up to you, because it is difficult to navigate a whole other landscape, because that's what it is. You're not walking, you're not doing a thing that you've been doing from birth. You're learning to breathe, you're learning to move in a different atmosphere. And so more and more, the water has been a really big part of my spiritual journey. It's one ways that we, kind of say that someone has to go into this journey of healing, and having a healer as your guide to move you through life and to teach you things. And water is a big part of how we work within that space. And so for me, I've constantly been dreaming about water for years now. And sometimes for 5 years it's the same dream, and sometimes it changes and it becomes something different. But this relationship with water versus like friends who have a very different relationship with water, who can swim, who feel like their anxieties are settled within waters, kind of like opens my mind to what water holds and what kind of a space of healing it can be, even though the history around it is very kind of, depending on which part of the world you are, it can be quite gruesome, very tied to a lot of bodies, death of slavery, all of that. And to kind of read about it in such a heavy way of like a place where a lot of bodies are at rest, but then also having this very, very joyful, very lighthearted pull to it. I mean, yeah, I think it's a wonderful place that holds a lot of memory, holds a lot of history, and I think is a huge space of learning. Like water and the ocean and now rivers are a huge space of learning, of survival, and they hold so much in terms of information. And so I guess that has been my understanding, or my relationship with water, is kind of learning about it through myself and my friends around what it means and what has been our different relationships to it, and imagining all this information that it has. Yeah.
That's beautifully evocative, and it really makes me think about some of the ways in which Donna Confer and Ellen Gallagher talk about water, and their kind of use of this, this sort of the symbolism of water in the work, which has different sorts of registers in it and different resonances. I'm going to, there's a couple of questions in here, but I'm actually I want to ask this question because I think it might sort of segue into one of the questions that have been asked, and I'm really, you can kind of push back on this if you want to. That's an invitation there for you to do this, and it's a kind of debate. The question that I'm asking is a bit of a provocation, actually. It's a bit of a debate which we are coming to terms with, I guess, in the UK. The debate's happening, I guess, in different spaces where notions of blackness have a kind of very distinct quality, and so there was again, it's in the essay, which I believe is in the journal that Lawrence mentioned, called Staff Riders and Witch Doctors. And this jumped out at me, which said, Black arts is a cartographic story made up of this space of danger. So there's that word again, danger. But also this idea of Black arts, it's not attempting to kind of describe what Black arts is, but it's creating a context for your work and talking about it as a series of kind of maps and layers and territories which might represent what Black arts is. What do you think? How would you talk about your work in relation to a sort of a racialized practice, or do you refute that as a way to understand your work?
No, I think kind of been, I guess, very clear about my work being or coming from like Black experiences from the get. I mean, it's also, when I say lived experience, it's my lived experience. So um, it it very much has to do with our history of colonialism and forced migrations and things like that. So it's quite clear where it's coming from or where it's standing. It's within a political space and addressing certain histories. And so for me, I'm like, I'm like, it's everywhere in my work and all the time, I guess, I think, within the writing at least. I kind of express that this is what it is, because sometimes it can be very directly towards a specific idea or a specific space or an experience. And sometimes it becomes a lot broader. But I mean, I can understand my work, I guess without any text or put in a different space, sometimes you is quite abstract and I guess isn't um, may not be very clear about the things that it is addressing. I mean, that's just how I feel. But yeah, I feel like I am speaking on Black histories and experiences, which bleed outside of South Africa, because some experiences are shared. And so even though my starting point is in a particular place, um, the work kind of bleeds into when I speak with other artists, from other Black artists from different places, we kind of like see NPOC people, and we see like different in the materials and the subject matters. A lot of these, I guess, a lot of these experiences towards the territories or the places that we live in is quite shared, because the language, um, and I guess the form of like colonialism in this language of like structure is consistent also. I think sometimes that's the way how we're able to talk about certain things, is because um, there are certain methods kind of that replicated all over in different colonial parts that you like, oh yeah, we understand that, we know that, or we have that too here. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I have to say with regards to that.
So there's, and thank you for that. I think it is a kind of a reinstating and an underscoring of the importance of your articulation of what a Black art practice is for you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a question about how your Black identity influences your work. And this question's from somebody who's an artist who's white British, who says they're not conscious of their whiteness influencing their art at all. Would you say it's a fascinating question, I have to say, because I'll be honest, just to put the person who's asking the question, I'm not sure that Lungiswa can answer this. I'm going to pitch it to you. You can, like anything that I said, you can kind of push back on it. But do you think that this is common with the practice of white artists, that they are not conscious of their whiteness? Again, I sort of think that doesn't feel like the territory of your work, so you can absolutely kind of push back on that. But there is something about, actually, when you talk about, well, not you, but when we articulate what Blackness is, I think implicit in that is this notion of what whiteness does, which is to exclude, which is to speak from a place of dominance. So there is an interest in that, and there's of course I'm going to forget her name now, who wrote a fantastic book called Citizen, who's sort of part of her research practice. She won one of these MacArthur scholarships. Her whole research practice, and it was a sort of collective practice, was this interrogation into whiteness. Mm-hmm. When actually a lot of her work had been about this kind of understanding of racialized positions. So do you have anything to say about whiteness?
No, I have nothing to say about why, or if that's what I think in terms of if white people address their whiteness. That's like that's on y'all to figure out amongst yourselves. I don't know. My experiences of my peers is that, you know, there's like this thing of I guess having to make work about um as Black artists having to always make work about Blackness and pain and all of these things, and we can make about joy too, and and for me, I'm all of my practice stems from what is happening around me and what I have lived, and the work changes with me also. And you know, this is our lives that we're outside of the arts are really kind of trying to work and organize and fight for in like real life. um, there's a lot of work in which we have to do to get to a place where, you know, we're not pinning ourselves against whiteness, that we're able to kind of live in our own communities and, you know, live the way we want, but we're not really afforded that. So we're busy kind of trying to figure out ways and how to live and to survive in this world. So I don't have time to really to think about, I don't know, like still lives or flowers or whatever. I mean, I know this sounds shady, but it's like this I have the I don't know, for me, and I only speak for myself, but for me, this is the most urgent thing that I can think to give my time and my labor to, because that's what it is. I'm giving my time and my labor and my thinking. And we're, you know, trying to understand certain things, trying to figure out ways in which we can change things. We can, what other ways of knowing and being can we come up with? How can we imagine, and what can we extract from these imaginations that we can apply in real life? That's, for me, is the space of where I'm kind of working and living. And by working, I mean doing this art thing and like living. It's like that, it bleeds into it. That's where I choose to spend my time in. And that is the most pressing thing in my life, because it literally is my whole life. I do not get to tap out of it. I do not get to not see it. And I do not have that choice to, you know, deal with something else. I mean, and so I feel like maybe somewhere there could be an answer to that question of whether or not white artists are, you know, able to be concerned with their whiteness in their work. Like, find it there. It's in there. What I just said, yeah, the answer is in there. So.
Yeah, and that was sort of a wonderful kind of unpacking of the kind of real sort of endeavour in your work. So I want to sort of move to the sort of physicality in your work. We spoke a lot about the sort of the ideas, the sort of deep philosophical intent in your work, the kind of lived experience, this sense of about how there is no separation between you and your work. This idea of when you say you can't tap out, I love that idea, can't tap out. Many people visiting the exhibition, so this is a question that's been posed. Many people visiting the exhibition have spoken of taking something of it with them when they leave the building, whether it's the kind of the sonic experience, the music, the clay, that sort of physical evidence of things that might be left on the soles of your shoes, I guess, those traces that are there. Can you say something about that element of your work, of those things which might be taken away?
Yeah, I think I'm always trying to figure that out. I think I get really frustrated, I guess, of making artworks, and they go into these spaces, these galleries, and there's always these white spaces, and I'm always like thinking to myself, but is this doing anything? Like, is it doing anything? Is it changing anything, beyond that time that the work is up? And I guess it's like a question that has you know, gnawed at me for like years, and I'm still trying to figure out, mind you. And I'm like, okay, maybe this thing that you want to do that is so effective to the outside world, to the community, has to be done outside of this arts. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe some people have figured out how to do it, but for me, I'm struggling of how to do it myself. And so, sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. Oh, damn. Sorry, can you tell me what the question is again?
It was about, so we were talking about the traces that visitors take away with them, and you were talking about actually the challenges of working in this,
Right.
the kind of the white space.
Yeah, so I guess one of the ways that I'm kind of trying to figure out in what ways the work or the conversation, or everything that the work carries can exist outside this space. I've been trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? How do we go home? How do we become part of dinner discussions? And how does the work exist outside of the gallery without having to be placed outside of it, I guess? Or how can it move into different places? And so some of the ways in which I've seen that it can slightly be possible has been through like smell, like introducing smells, or burning impepo in the space, things like that, like stick to the body, the hair, the clothes, and everything. I have, and petrol sometimes, does that same thing, causing of headaches and things like that, things that linger on past the exhibition time, or past you in the presence of the work. And so, yeah, I've been trying to figure out, like, in terms of material or the multi-sensory aspect of putting together something, how do I move with how does the work move with the people? How does it extend outside those white walls? Because I think that, I don't know, for me, that is a very important, it's an important thing to know that, the residue can always kind of, I guess, spark another a revisiting in some way of the work, outside of the person being in the work. So I guess, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what ways in which I can do that. And so it's nice to hear that even like the sound has managed to do that with people, because it is a beautiful song. Also, so yeah, thank you for that, because I'm like gonna think about sound even more intensely now. But yeah, it's something that I'm always kind of trying and figure out and stretching to see how the work can exist in different ways. Yeah.
That idea of smell clinging to your clothes and to your hair is so profound, really, and in terms of what it triggers in terms of memory as well. So, and not just about the kind of the lingering of an experience elsewhere, but that you might have had, but an experience of others. So you've spoken about this smell of burning as well, what that might evoke. And there's that reference to danger again, obliquely, I guess, when you think about burning, because burning has other sorts of less aggressive connotations. We are drawing to a close now, but I just wanted to there's a comment that was posted a while ago that I wanted to kind of bring us back to, because I think it also helps to think about some of the things that you've been talking about in terms of territories or territorialized spaces and exclusion, and what's making a difference. So the photograph of the Black woman outside the building worked. This is a comment by somebody in the group.
Oh, snap.
I went in having never been in the building before. You're right, the building is not open to all. So
Yeah.
it's, you know, that photograph, the monumental scale of that photograph, what the photograph contained of kind of Black women in joy, despite the space, you know, being on a beach, which we know was a kind of territorialized space during apartheid, you know, it still conveyed that the sentiment of invitation, which is powerful in your work. So we have just under a minute left. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say, Lungiswa, before we say goodbye to everybody. Obviously, I want to thank you for your wonderful words, just that kind of real deep immersion, even only for an hour into your ideas and the work that you've made for the exhibition at the Henry Moore Institute. But is there anything that you'd like to say before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, other than really thanking people for giving their times, like a whole hour of their lives and their work to listen to me like talk and think with you, as is really lovely to see people interested and willing to engage is always really nice. It's always like a thing that we don't get too much. When we put up work, we disappear. So yeah, I'm happy for this space that the Henry Moore has created for me, and this platform and you for being able to give your time and your thoughts to my work, and yeah, giving me also some things to think on. So I appreciate that. And so thank you to everybody.
It's been a wonderful encounter. I hope we get to meet in person. I know that I will definitely be seeing your work again. It's incredibly powerful. And your words just have really helped me to kind of understand your practice better. So a lot of thank yous in the chat. Thank you for the insights, the joys, brilliant insights. So yeah, huge appreciation for your time tonight, Lungiswa. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. And yeah, the link for the book is in the chat if you want to find out more about Lungiswa's work. Thank you.
Thank you.